Hey, what's going on, guys? How is everybody doing? So we already did a Ganyu reverse melt team. That was the team that you guys voted to see from my Ganyu team building guide. However, you guys were so adamant and you guys were so close in getting this team to #1. I figured, what the heck, let's go about and talk about this one anyway. And I also think that this is actually the better team. So I did want to highlight this team, let you guys know how to build it and why it is so good and why I think it is actually Ganyu's best team comp. But before we get into it, I do want to ask you guys a question to start off the video, and that is, if you are planning on rolling for Xiao, what is the team you are initially looking to try him with? I'm kind of curious myself. I have some ideas of what I'm looking to do, but I'm curious as to what you guys are going to do. So leave those answers down in the comment section below. And without further ado, let's hop right into this video and talk about our Ganyu freeze comp. So this is the team we're looking at. This is Ganyu, Mona, Diona, and Venti. And really, there is one reason why we're doing this specific freeze combo. It's because of the interaction between Ganyu and Mona. So if you aren't familiar with how these two work together, let's go over it, and let's actually go away from this page and let's go actually look at Mona's burst first. So the reason this team works is because of the interaction between the freeze mechanic and Mona's burst. And as we're going to see, it doesn't work exactly the way it's worded. In fact, it's worded kind of incorrectly. So when an opponent affected by illusory bubble sustains damage, it has the following effects. Applies an Omen to the opponent, which gives a damage bonus, also increasing the damage of the attack that causes it. It also removes the bubble, dealing Hydra damage in the process. So if you're familiar with any of these like Mona combo videos where you get a really big number, it's that second one. Removing the bubble is what's dealing a large amount of damage. However, the first half is actually worded incorrectly. So again, this is suggesting that it applies an Omen when the bubble is popped, or when an enemy that's caught up in this burst sustains damage. And if we look in their skill attributes, it looks like that Omen duration is 5 seconds. However, that is not accurate. The way it actually works is as soon as you activate Mona's burst, the Omen is applied. What this 5 seconds is once you pop the bubble, you get a 5-second timer that starts ticking down, and as soon as that timer is over, the Omen goes away. But if you can go X amount of time without damaging the opponent, the Omen is still there, but you're not taking advantage of it, obviously, because you're not dealing damage and getting this extra damage bonus. So how do we cheese this mechanic? Well, it turns out frozen enemies can't have their bubble popped. So if you can freeze the enemy before the Omen is applied, you can keep hitting the enemy and take advantage of the 60% damage bonus and not start the Omen timer. So what we can do is first apply cryo, then use Mona's burst. It will freeze the enemy. You can keep attacking the enemy and leave the Omen on. It doesn't work the other way around, however, because if you apply the Omen first, then deal your cryo, that counts as damage. Even though it's freezing the enemy, the bubble will still be popped. So there is a certain order you have to do this, but as long as we can keep them frozen, it means that they're not going to pop their bubble, and we're getting a huge damage bonus, especially to Ganyu, who already hits really hard. You know, percentages like bigger numbers, so if we can get those numbers really high, we're getting a huge damage bonus here. So that's really the main core that we're building around with this team, is Ganyu and Mona. Now, we move on to Diona, who is going to be our primary healer. We needed a healer, and she fits really well. She also creates shields, which is super important because both Ganyu and Mona, and actually all the units on this team, are really squishy. So having that little preventive measure and not needing to rely on Diona's heals is actually very important. She also adds some extra little utility, like lowering the opponent's attack, stuff like that, stuff that's pretty minimal, but is super nice to have. She's also one half of the cryo resonance. So with Ganyu and Diona, we're getting an extra 15% crit on enemies affected by cryo. And because this is a freeze set, we're trying to get enemies frozen. That's a lot of cryo going around. And since Ganyu's main attacks apply cryo anyway, we're going to be able to keep up that cryo debuff a lot. So that's an extra 15% that we don't even have to worry about with her artifacts. And as we'll see when we get to Ganyu's artifacts, you really don't need to worry about crit rate at all with this team. And last up, we have Venti, and I'll be honest, Venti is just kind of like too good. A lot of the times he actually kills things before we can even get the combo off. He works really well in tandem with both Ganyu and Mona because both of these units really want enemies clumped up. Ganyu's burst works extremely well because each crystal is going to target up to 6 enemies in its radius. Even if those enemies are right next to each other, it's going to target all of them, and since it's all AoE, you're going to deal a lot more damage that way. Mona, same way, because she wants enemies grouped up for her burst. You can group them all up, apply the burst, get them frozen, and then you're going to deal a lot more damage. The other reason Venti is so good on this team is because we're not trying to apply multiple elements. Like the reverse melt team, where we had both pyro and cryo constantly being applied at both times, we're really only applying cryo here because as soon as Mona applies Hydra, we're freezing our enemies. So Venti can come in with a veneer set and really just shred that cryo resonance and just increase Ganyu's damage overall. So now that we've gone over the full team and why we've selected all the heroes that we have, let's dive a little bit deeper into each individual hero, and we're going to start here with Ganyu. So first up, let's take a look at weapons. Now, when we take a look at weapons, really, of course, she's going to have two best because they're going to be the 5-star weapons. Skyward Harp and Amos Bow are absolutely insane on Ganyu. Technically, on paper, Amos Bow is a bit better. The fact is that her passive is just very, very strong. You're getting a 15% increase to her normal and charged attack, but we're also getting an extra 10% up to 5 times based on how long the arrow flies. And the way this interacts with her charge shot and bloom is that the time between the charge shot and the bloom is 0.3 seconds, and that actually counts towards this damage increase. So your bloom is pretty much always guaranteed to at least have an extra 30% damage, and that's assuming that you have like 0 fly time, which is actually very hard to do. So pretty much you're always going to get an extra 50% damage, which is absolutely insane, plus that huge attack buff on top of it. Now, if we look over here at Skyward Harp, if you saw my reverse melt team, and if you haven't, I do suggest going to watch that one. I think it was pretty sweet. But if you didn't, I did really like Skyward Harp on that team. But the reason I like Skyward Harp on that team and not as much on this team is because when we were looking at the reverse melt team, we weren't using a 4-piece Blizzard Strayer set, so we were losing a lot of crit rate. So I really did like the extra crit rate that this bow provided. However, with this build specifically, we have a lot of passive crit rate, which we will get to once we get to the artifacts. But because of that, I actually prefer the damage bonus, and honestly, Amos Bow is just better overall, but it feels a little bit better because you already have that crit rate. Even though Amos Bow is technically better on both teams, it's a lot better on this team than it was on the reverse melt team. Now, that all being said, I do obviously understand that a lot of people, or most people, are not going to have both of these bows or even one of these bows. So let's take a look at her 4-star weapons, as that's going to be her sweet spot in terms of performance to price. So she has 3 bows that really stand out above the rest, and those are Prototype Crescent, Blackcliff Warbow, and Viridescent Hunt, the same 3 bows that we saw in the reverse melt comp. Now, the one that I actually prefer here is Blackcliff Warbow. The reason being is Prototype Crescent technically will perform better than Blackcliff Warbow. However, because of the passive, which is you have to hit an enemy's weak spot for it to take effect, some enemies just don't have weak spots, and some enemies are really hard to hit constant like headshots or weak spots. So because of that, you might not be able to get it up all the time. So I actually really like the extra crit damage, especially with this build, because we're going to have so much innate crit rate. We can just kind of take advantage of the crit damage and not really have to worry about the passive, but she does kill things incredibly quickly, so that passive is going to give us a nice little attack boost. Even a 1-stack or a 2-stack is going to be a huge boost. Now, Viridescent Hunt, on the other hand, not nearly as good on this comp as it was on the reverse melt comp, and honestly, I wasn't even crazy about it there, because really, we're not really taking advantage of that extra crit rate, and the passive is just fine. So if you're choosing between the 4-star weapons, my money would go to either the Prototype Crescent if you need a free weapon, or if you got a little bit of star glitter to spend, Blackcliff Warbow will be very, very good. And if you need a 3-star weapon because you're just not at the 4-star level yet, Sharpshooter's Oath will be your best option for that extra crit damage. Now, looking forward at her artifacts, she has one easily the best in slot set, and that is the 4-piece Blizzard Strayer. The fact is, we are going to be applying a lot of cryo, but we're also going to be freezing enemies since this is a freeze team. So because of that, we're going to be getting at minimum an extra 20% crit rate, and at maximum an extra 40% crit rate. That is huge. The fact that we can get 40% crit rate without even touching the stats on our artifacts, just looking at the passive, that is huge. Now, if we really think about it and take a look at how good this set is for Ganyu, I think you'll see that the crit rate from this is absolutely insane, because of course you're getting that 40% crit rate if you're attacking frozen enemies, but looking deeper into it, she already has a 5% crit rate, right? Every character has a 5% base crit rate. You're also getting a 20% extra crit rate on her charge attacks based on her passive talent. Then we add the cryo resonance on top of that, and that's an extra 15% if we're attacking cryo afflicted enemies. That brings us up to 40%. Now, with this Blizzard Strayer set, we can at least assume that we were attacking enemies that are affected by cryo, because the initial charge shot will deal cryo damage, and then the bloom will get the benefit from this set. So we're looking at least 60% crit rate, 80% if we're attacking frozen enemies. That is absolutely massive. Without even touching substats, main stats, or anything, we're already at a 60 to 80% crit rate. So we don't even have to touch crit rate. It's a stat that we don't even have to worry about on our artifacts. Now, 4P sets are kind of hard to farm, and I'll be honest, I don't know what the deal with the rates is in this specific domain, but they are pretty garbage. So if you have been not exactly lucky in getting a 4P set, the best alternative will be a 2-piece Blizzard Strider set and a 2-piece Gladiator set. That way we get an extra 18% attack, which is going to increase all aspects of her damage, which is very important given that she's going to be on the field utilizing all her abilities simultaneously. So now looking at her artifacts here for her main stats, we're going to be looking for attack on her timepiece. We did look into elemental mastery for the reverse melt comp. However, this team, we are not doing any kind of reaction damage, so it's really only attack. Energy recharge should really only be saved for her support builds. We don't really need it on this DPS build. She'll be generating more than enough energy. For her cup, cryo damage, of course. She does all cryo damage. And lastly, for the circlet, we want crit damage. There's no need to worry about crit rate in this build. As we've already discussed, her crit rate is already going to be through the roof. So just focus on getting a good crit damage piece. It doesn't actually have to be good. Just get crit damage. As far as substats go, crit damage. Just get more crit damage. But of course, if you can't get that, other alternatives are going to be attack, energy recharge, and of course you can get more crit rate to try and get closer up to that 100% because we like that, but it will also help you out if your enemies are not exactly frozen. You just get a little bit of extra boost there. And of course, with her talents, make sure that her basic attack is as high as you can get it. We want these multipliers to be absolutely kicking, and we just want to deal as much damage possible and basically put a burst on her basic attack. Next up, we have the second most important unit on this team, and that is Mona. So let's start, of course, by looking at her weapons. Her best in slot weapon is going to be the Widsith. Now, normally I'm not exactly super high on the Widsith, and that's because usually one of the passives is not that useful, that I find. So if we take a look at the passive here, when this character takes the field after 30 seconds, for 10 seconds, they're going to gain one of these benefits. So it's either going to be an attack increase, an elemental damage increase, or an elemental mastery increase. Now, of course, on this team, we're not even looking for that elemental mastery, and that's why I'm not super crazy about the Widsith, is because it's kind of a gamble. Sometimes it's really, really good, and sometimes it just does nothing. Now, that being said, we do get a massive crit damage boost on this weapon from the substat, which is very good. Now, you might be asking, well, if that's the case, if we don't really like the passive, then why aren't we going with one of the 5-star weapons, either Lost Prairie of the Sacred Winds or Skyward Atlas? And really, it comes down to their passives as well. The thing is that Mona is really here just for her Hydro element. We don't really need her for damage. It's obviously very nice, but it's not the main priority. So we do have some nice substats here, crit rate, obviously, and attack. But the thing is, with the passives, we're really not going to be able to take advantage of them because Mona's not going to be on the field long enough to actually build up any damage stacks. So for that reason, and the fact that they cost so much, it's not really worth it to go with those. If you have them, they're probably better off used on different heroes. That said, if you have them, they're probably going to be pretty good if you have them leveled up. But if you're starting from scratch, it's not really where I would start because they are so expensive to build. So Widsith is going to be kind of our best right in the middle weapon. It's extremely powerful, and when it does roll well, you're doing real well. Now, as for alternatives, I do really like Favonius Codex because Mona's damage is going to scale with energy recharge, and we're going to need energy recharge to build up that burst as fast as possible, as that's what she's here for. Some other alternatives, if you did just want a little bit extra damage, you could also go with Blackcliff Agate, as it is another crit damage weapon, or you could go with like an Eye of Perception, go for a little bit more attack damage, or you could go with like an Eye of Perception or Frostbear for just a little bit extra attack percentage, although we're not really going to be taking advantage of either of their passives. Now, looking at our artifact sets, we actually have a couple different options. If you wanted to go for a little bit more damage, you could actually go for a 2-piece Heart of Depth and a 2-piece Noblesse Oblige, or you could swap one of those out with like an Exile or Scholar sets for a little bit of extra energy recharge. Though, as you guys probably know by now, I'm not crazy about those sets. I don't really like the 4-star artifacts. Just you end up losing out on substats, on main stats, and an entire substat in and of itself. So if we're not doing that, I actually prefer Mona on this team to be our 4-piece Noblesse user. I always like to have one on every team because it's so universal. Now, I have a feeling that a lot of people will suggest that you should put it on Diona instead, but when we get to her, I will mention why we're not putting it there and why we're putting it on Mona here. And for our main stats, we do want energy recharge on our timepiece. It's going to be very important. Her damage does scale off of energy recharge, but also, like I said, when we talked about her weapons, we really want to get that burst up as often as possible. That's why she's here. So having energy recharge is going to be absolutely vital. Of course, for her cup, figures, we want Hydra damage. And lastly, for her circlet, you can go with either crit rate or crit damage, depending on what you need from your substats. I have crit rate here because my substats are not that great. So I want a little bit of extra crit rate, so that way when the bubble does pop, we can get big damage from there, as that's where she's going to be doing a majority of her damage. And of course, for her substats, just make sure you get a ton of energy recharge. That's really the most important thing. And then go for your crit rates, crit damage, attack, those things next. And for her talents, I'm assuming you guys have already figured this out. Go for her burst. That's why she's here. We want this to do as much damage as possible. We also want this damage bonus to be as high as possible, plus the Omen duration. So when it does pop, we get a little bit more extra time. That's the reason why she's here. Focus on that. So next up, we have our healer, Diona, and Diona really only has 2 weapons that we'd be looking to build. So she's actually very easy to look at. We have the Sacrificial Bow and we have Favonius Warbow. Now, the way you build your sets for each of these weapons will be slightly different. So first of all, let's start with Sacrificial Bow, and both these bows are energy recharge weapons. It's very important. Diona's ult does cost 80 energy, so we want to make sure that we can get her ult up as soon as possible, just in case we take a little bit of damage, as this team is pretty squishy, so we want to make sure that our heals are active. Now, the reason that Sacrificial Bow is so good on Diona is that if you're holding her skill, which you should be, that's like the best way to use it, each paw actually has a chance to proc this passive. So with, you know, a 60% chance if it's refinement 1 for each paw, that's 60% chance. So you have 5 60% chances to proc this passive, which is very good. So it basically means that you're going to have almost 100%. It's like 90% or whatever the math is, chance to proc this passive and get another use out of your skill, which is going to be more energy, specifically for Ganyu, just because it's cryoparticles and she'll get more out of it, but for your whole team as well. It also just means you have access to more shields, which will in turn mean you don't have to heal as much. The other option is Favonius Warbow. Now, the difference here is that you're not going to have as many skills up because you're not getting an extra one for the Sacrificial Bow passive, but it does mean that you're generating more particles overall for your team. Now, the thing is that she can only proc this passive when she's on the field, so like her burst isn't a great way to proc this, but really, again, because her skill has 5 chances to crit, we can get this off pretty consistently. Now, that being said, it does mean that we're going to want to build a little bit of crit into her kit, whereas Sacrificial Bow, it doesn't really matter. So keep that in mind. If you go with Favonius Warbow, you're going to want to build a little bit of crit rate into her kit, which, as we already know, is kind of hard to do even for your DPS. So to put it on a support, maybe not the best thing. So take that into consideration when you're looking to build a weapon for Diona. So now we get to her artifacts, and for me personally, a lot of times I do like to run the 4-piece Maiden Beloved set, and I know that a lot of people are probably going to say that that's overkill, and for a lot of times that's true. However, because Diona's healing ticks are rather slow, I do like them to be a little bit stronger than your normal healer, so that's why I like the 4-piece Maiden Beloved set here. However, a lot of times I don't actually run the 4-piece Maiden Beloved, I actually run a 4-piece Noblesse Oblige set on her. Now, the reason we're not doing it here is because it is a little bit better on Mona, but if you don't have a good Noblesse Oblige user, or you just have a unit that you want to pump a little bit more damage into, it's nice to be able to kind of offload that 4-piece Noblesse set onto your Diona. But also, the reason that I don't like doing it on this team specifically is because all our units are pretty squishy. I do like to have access to my burst whenever I need it, and that means that I'm not unloading it every time I have access to it. And that's kind of what you want to be doing with a 4-piece Noblesse user, is just use their burst basically on cooldown. So that way you always have access to that passive. So because with Mona, we're actively trying to spam her burst, it makes sense to use it on her as opposed to Diona, where we might want to hold back on her burst and just hold it for kind of an emergency situation where we do need to heal up our party. Now, that being said, if you don't have a 4-piece set, I would switch out 2 of these for an Exile or Scholar set for a little bit of extra energy recharge, which will help out in building her burst quicker. Now, when we look at stats here, HP is the name of the game. Both Diona's shields and heals scale off HP, so we want to get that as high as possible. So, of course, we want to make sure her flower is leveled up, but also on her main pieces. Her timepiece, we want to put HP, her cup, HP, and you guessed it, her circlet HP. Now, I have healing bonus here just because I haven't leveled up an HP circlet yet, because healing bonus is a little bit more universal. You can throw it across all your other healers. You could go healing bonus if you want a little bit more heals. Going HP will make her shield stronger though, so it's kind of a toss-up. Do you want more heals or do you want more shields? If you're running a 4-piece Maiden Beloved set, you probably don't need healing bonus. It's probably overkill, gonna be honest with you. The other thing you could do here is if you really wanted to, you can go crit rate if you're using the Favonius Warbow, because remember, like we said, you kind of do need a little bit of crit rate investment if you're going with that weapon. Though you could just go HP and look for more crit rate in your substats, that would also be just fine. And looking at her talents, a lot of people might think it's actually better to increase her shields first because, I don't know, people tend to like shields. But the thing is, I tend to prefer restoration over prevention. Over time, if you're just preventing damage, you will die. But with restoration, you can come back from almost dying and really just kind of reset your team. So for that reason, I actually prefer to level up my burst first and then focus on the skill later. Of course, you kind of do one of these. It's better to do it that way. But if you're wondering which one you should level over the other, usually my answer is going to be burst. The other thing is, because we're going to want to use our burst some of the time to help proc Frozen over time in conjunction with Mona, it'll be nice to have that little bit of extra damage here, as her burst is more consistent at applying cryo than her skill is. And lastly, we have Venti, and I'm going to be straight up with you guys right at the top. This unit is a mess to build properly. If you're looking for like the end-all be-all kit, you're not going to find it here, because I've looked at the numbers and they are all over the place. So you are going to have to look at your individual stats, builds, weapons, and all that to figure out how to build it best. So in order to do that, I'm going to be linking the Venti Mains Discord alt spreadsheet down in the description below. So that way you guys can take a look at the numbers and judge for yourself what way you would like to build his artifacts and his weapon. But let's go and look and see what options he has available. So his best option is going to be probably Stringless. Stringless is going to be the easiest one to refine up, if you're wishing, of course, because it is a gotcha weapon. But it's going to be easier to refine than your 5-star weapons. He's also going to get a huge increase in damage to both his skill and his burst. Plus, it's got Elemental Mastery on it, which is going to help out your swirls. It's just overall a good weapon. But what other weapons can he use? Well, we got Rust, we got Prototype Crescent, we got Sacrificial Bow, we got Blackcliff Warbow, Viridescent Hunt, Favonius Warbow, Royal Bow, Amos Bow, Skyward Harp. Really, all of these are going to work. He's extremely versatile. He doesn't really have a best weapon. As I said, it really kind of depends on where his level is, because a lot of his damage scales with level, in fact, which is how Swirl works. It's really hard to pin down what his best weapon is. So it's like, do you need energy recharge? Do you need more damage? Do you need more elemental mastery? Do you need more crit damage? It's all kind of like, it's a push and pull to figure out what's going to work best. So really, it's like whatever bow you have leveled up, slap it on him and he's going to absolutely kill it. Now, in regards to his actual set bonuses, there's really no question about it. Viridescent Venerer is his best set, hands down. He is going to be dealing so much swirl damage with his burst that you can just absorb cryo. It's going to, well, first of all, it's going to increase his swirl damage, but also it's going to decrease the enemy's resistance to whatever element you swirl. So if you're swirling cryo, it's going to really help out your Ganyu's damage. It's absolutely insane. It's one of the best sets in the game, honestly. So really, there's no contest, but if you did want to switch it up, you could go with a 2-piece and 2-piece Noblesse Oblige just for the extra damage. Technically, on a Venti solo basis, that set does actually do more damage, but as a team player, Viridescent Venerer is always going to be his best set. Now for his main stats, this is where it is a complete mess, and you're going to have to look at that spreadsheet down below to figure out for yourself what is going to be the best solution for you. Because for his timepiece, we could be looking at attack, we could be looking at elemental mastery, we could be looking at energy recharge. For his cup, we could be looking at attack. We could be looking for an emo damage bonus. For his circlet, we could be looking for crit rate. We could be looking for crit damage. We could be looking for attack. We could be looking for elemental mastery. There are so many different stats and they're all really tight. And because his damage is actually also scaling on his level, that actually plays a huge factor into it. So really, like, any of those is going to give him like really solid damage. Actually fine-tuning it is actually very, very difficult, I found. So I'm just going to take myself out of it and leave it to you guys to figure out what the best composition is for you. But yeah, in terms of substats, you know, go for your crit rate, go for elemental mastery, attack, energy recharge. They're all going to do you just fine. And as for his talents, I mean, do you really have to ask? It's his burst. His burst is nuts. It's one of the best bursts in the game. With CC, incredible damage. Honestly, he's probably going to be killing things faster than you can with Ganyu. Like, it's absolutely insane. Level this thing up as high as you can and call it a day. So hopefully you guys did like the team build. Hopefully it helps you build your own freeze team. I actually think this team is absolutely insane. I think it's a lot better than Ganyu's reverse melt team. My own personal preference, of course. Let me know what you guys think of the team down below in the comment section. But as usual, I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to leave you guys with some gameplay to finish out the video. But before I do go, if you guys like the video and you want to see some more content from me, you can head over to my Twitch page, twitch.tv/xjazzy. Or if you want to support me right here on YouTube, you can click that red subscribe button, like the video if you liked it, and click that notification bell. That way you never miss a video. And if you want to join our community over on Discord, link is always down in the description below. But guys, that's all I got for today. Hopefully you did enjoy. Stay tuned for the gameplay, and I'll see y'all in the next video. Peace.